3 gunmen, 1 organization. 59 years later, we're still being lied to about who pulled the trigger. For decades, the narrative was bulletproof. Malcolm X was killed by members of the Nation of Islam, his former organization, out of revenge for his departure and his public criticism of Elijah Muhammad. The men were caught, convicted, and the case was closed. I've read the trial transcripts myself. The evidence seemed airtight, but starting in 2020, something shifted. A deathbed confession, new witnesses, documents that had been sealed since 1965. And suddenly, the story we'd all accepted began to unravel like a thread pulled from a worn suit. Let's start with what everyone was told. February 21, 1965, Audubon Ballroom in Manhattan. Malcolm X, age 39, was about to address the Organization of Afro-American Unity when a commotion erupted in the audience. Gunfire, 16 shots. He was dead within minutes. Police arrested 3 men, Talmadge Hayer, Mohammed, Aziz, and Khalil Islam. All 3 had connections to the Nation of Islam. The motive seemed clear. Malcolm had left the nation, exposed Elijah Muhammad's affairs and illegitimate children, and become a threat to the organization's control. Trial lasted 3 weeks. Hayer's ballistics evidence was damaging. Witnesses placed him at the scene. He'd even been caught by audience members trying to escape, shot in the leg during the chaos. The prosecution's case was lean but effective. The Nation of Islam wanted Malcolm silenced, and these 3 men carried out the order. 2 were convicted. One, Hayer, eventually confessed, sort of. He admitted being present and shooting, but claimed the other 2 weren't involved. That confession should have been a flag, but it wasn't treated as one. Here's where I have to pause, because what I just told you, that's the official story, and for 59 years it held, but the specifics don't quite fit when you examine them closely. Hayer's own legal team argued he was being used as a scapegoat. He passed a polygraph test denying the involvement of his co-defendants. Yet 2 men, Aziz and Islam, served decades in prison for a crime they may not have committed. One died in 2009, still claiming innocence. Then in 2020, Mohammed Aziz was exonerated, 55 years after conviction. The reason? New evidence that had been withheld from the defense. Evidence that investigators knew about but never disclosed. I've seen the documentation. The NYPD and the FBI had informants inside the Nation of Islam. One of those informants, and this is crucial, had advanced knowledge of a plot to kill Malcolm X. Not vague knowledge, specific knowledge. Names. Plans, timing. The question becomes, why wasn't that information shared? Why was the trial allowed to proceed without it? The official answer is bureaucratic negligence. But I've covered enough political assassinations to recognize when the pieces don't align that way. The FBI was deeply invested in Malcolm X. He was surveilled constantly. Wiretaps, mail intercepts, informants embedded in his organization. J. Edgar Hoover considered him a threat to national security, not because of violence, but because of his ideology, his reach. Now, this doesn't mean the FBI pulled the trigger, but it does mean they had intelligence that could have prevented the murder, or at least ensured the right people faced justice. Instead, that intelligence was buried. Aziz and Islam rotted in prison, while the actual network behind the assassination remained partially shielded. That's not negligence, that's a choice. The real story is more fractured than the official narrative allows. Yes, there were Nation of Islam members involved, but the operation was more complex. There were street-level tensions, political rivalries, and critically law enforcement knowledge that was weaponized through silence. The assassination wasn't just an act of religious zealotry. It was a convergence of forces, internal organizational conflict, federal surveillance, and calculated inaction by people who had the power to warn or intervene. In 2021, the NYPD and FBI finally released additional files. They revealed that the informant network around Malcolm's organization was more extensive than anyone realized. Some sources suggest there were as many as 4 separate informants feeding intelligence to authorities, each one operating independently, unaware of the others. That's a recipe for institutional blindness, everyone watching, nobody communicating. And critical information slipping through cracks that were never supposed to exist. What's remarkable and troubling is how long it took to surface the truth. Aziz spent 55 years fighting for vindication. His legal team had to file motion after motion, demand after demand, before prosecutors finally admitted, "We withheld exculpatory evidence." Not accidentally, by protocol, by design. The system protected itself first. Justice came second, if at all. The implications ripple outward. If federal agencies knew enough to prevent Malcolm X's assassination and chose not to act, what does that say about their obligations to the public? If evidence was deliberately withheld, how many other cases rest on incomplete or corrupted records? Aziz's exoneration didn't bring Malcolm back. It didn't restore 55 years to a man who should never have been imprisoned. But it did confirm something darker. The institutions meant to serve justice sometimes serve power instead. The assassination of Malcolm X remains partially unsolved. We know some of the men who fired. We don't know the full chain of command, the full extent of what authorities knew, or why that knowledge was suppressed. The official story, Nation of Islam Revenge, was never false, but it was incomplete. And in cases this consequential, incompleteness is another form of deception. Subscribe for the next case. Every assassination tells us something about the era it happened in, and the institutions that shaped it. Subscribe, there's a new unsolved assassination every week, and the truth gets buried deeper than you'd think.